I would first of all just like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be part of this panel today, because I think, as we all agree, Ramsay was a very important person to us, a very special person, and it's lovely to be here with all of you to honor him in this way. Well, I first heard about Ramsay Cook in 1966. At that time, I was a third-year honors history student at the University of Waterloo, taking a Canadian history course taught by Yves Zoltvanny. I grew up on a farm near Ingersoll, Ontario, a town formerly home to a branch of the Imperial Federation League, and at that time still proudly supporting 3 chapters of the Imperial Order of the Daughters of the Empire, and an orange parade each glorious 12th, featuring King Willie riding his white horse past the local Roman Catholic Church. Not surprisingly, I found the history of Quebec that Professor Zoltvanny wove throughout his course to be novel and intriguing fare. In fact, I had spent part of the previous summer at the Université de Montréal trying to improve my spoken French and learning as much as I could during that time about Quebec society and culture. The Quiet Revolution was well underway, and we were heading towards Canada's centennial. It was an exhilarating but anxious time as our generation grappled with what it meant to be Canadian against a backdrop of a re-energized, sometimes violent separatist movement. Now, one of the books that Yves Zoltvanny recommended to us was Ramsay Cook's Canada and the French-Canadian Question. Reading this work after we had debated our way through George Grant's Lament for a Nation and W.L. Morton's The Canadian Identity, this was the equivalent of inhaling a very deep breath of fresh intellectual air. Contained in this set of eloquently argued essays was an alternative vision of Canada, one based on the concept of a pluralistic nation-state in which a new accommodation between French and English might be fashioned. While the conventional wisdom of the day, and I'm sure we all heard it growing up, was our problem was we weren't like the Americans, we didn't have enough nationalism, here was a Canadian historian telling us we had in fact too many nationalisms in competing forms. I was inspired, I was hooked. So, towards the end of the term, I approached Zoltvanny about the possibility of channeling my enthusiasm for all things Quebec into a 4th-year course the following fall. His unanticipated response was that he had just accepted a position at the University of Western Ontario, so there would be no Canadian history seminar at the University of Waterloo the following year. Sensing my great disappointment, he made a novel proposal. I should transfer to U of T and study with Ramsay Cook. So he sent me straight away to consult with the chair of the department about how I might make this rather unorthodox move. The ensuing process tells us a lot about how much less complicated university bureaucracies were back in those days. While I sat in his office, the chair, Paul Cornell, picked up the phone and said to someone on the other line, "Morris, I've got a girl here who wants to study with Ramsay." And I heard a few uh-huh. He hung up the phone and promptly sent me off to the registrar's office to arrange to have my transcripts sent to Toronto, and that was that. However, my thrill at being accepted by the venerable University of Toronto came to an abrupt end later that summer when I met with Richard Helmstadter, the undergraduate program advisor. He informed me straight away that I would not be able to take Dr. Cook's popular course because it had filled quickly back in April when the university did its pre-registration exercise. 4th-year seminars, for those of you who went to U of T, you will remember, were held in professors' offices, and so the number of spaces was extremely limited. I, in turn, explained to Professor Helmstadter that the only reason I was transferring to University of Toronto was because I wanted to study with this particular professor. I didn't tell him that it was also at the cost of giving up my boyfriend of 2.5 years. I held that back. He concluded our meeting with a promise that he would ask Dr. Cook if he could fit in just one more student. And so I was left hanging for a few weeks, wondering what my fate would be. Fortunately, in keeping with what I would learn later was his customary generosity, Ramsay agreed to accept me. I remember walking into that class the next September and wondering if that youthful, red-haired man with the large horn-rimmed glasses and easy smile, who seemed to be in charge, was actually the famous Ramsay Cook. Of course he was, and that seminar on French-Canadian nationalism turned out to be one of my most formative academic experiences. Not only did I discover the joys that year of doing primary research as I worked on my major paper on Henri Bourassa and read year after year of Le Nationaliste, I also witnessed firsthand the critical role that historians can play in public discourse. Our class was excited to be filmed one day as Ramsay did yet another television interview about Quebec and Canada's future together. Another highlight was being invited to a convivial soiree at Ramsay and Eleanor's home, where we not only enjoyed lovely food and wine, but also got to hear a rare recording of Abbe Lionel Gru's speeches. Now, Marion Pearson has said very famously, "Behind every successful man is a surprised woman." I doubt very much that Eleanor was ever surprised by Ramsay's success, but I would like to acknowledge the very great contribution she made to it. Thank you, Eleanor, for making it possible for Ramsay to have had such a distinguished career while enjoying such a rich and happy home life. As an unsure undergrad, I appreciated the affirming manner in which Ramsay encouraged us to participate in discussions and to present our own opinions, however naive or ill-informed they might have been. And this is important. He treated his male and his female students with equal respect and provided equal encouragement to all of us who were interested in graduate studies. The one and only time we saw a very impatient, irate Ramsay Cook was when he started one of our 2-hour meetings one week, decrying the changes to governance that the University of Toronto was introducing at that time. He spent the entire seminar ripping to shreds the administration's misguided plans, and took the first hour of the following week's class to complete his rant. It was also in this class that Ramsay introduced us to the work of Fernand Ouellette, who had just published his magisterial Histoire économique et sociale du Québec. Another required reading was, same as Chris mentioned, Pierre Elliott Trudeau's celebrated essay relating to the asbestos strike. Ramsay's delight when Trudeau was named Minister of Justice just before our 4th-year seminar came to a close in April that year was readily apparent. And it was due in large measure to a letter of reference Ramsay wrote on my behalf that I was fortunate enough to receive a Sir John A. Macdonald Graduate Fellowship that summer. It enabled me to go to Carleton, where I studied with Ouellette. Since I was in Ottawa in the spring of 1968, I volunteered for Trudeau's leadership campaign and became one of the hundreds of placard-carrying Trudeau maniacs. I have many vibrant memories of that campaign, including Trudeau's Just Society speech that Ramsay helped craft and the celebrations at the Chateau Laurier following the leadership win. Ian and Sylvia were performing to a jam-packed ballroom, and Ramsay was definitely in full party mode. That fall, I went to Paris, where thanks to Fernand Ouellette, I had a meeting with Robert Mondru, Ouellette's thesis supervisor and a member of the influential Annales School of French Historians. Mondru kindly took me under his wing and arranged for me to audit his graduate course at the École Pratique des Hautes Études. It was during this time in Paris that I decided to pursue doctoral studies, and I applied to study with Ramsay, who had now just moved to York from the University of Toronto. And so I arrived here at York in the fall of 1969 as one of the members of the first cohort of graduate students in the history department. As a graduate student, I profited once again from Ramsay's profound knowledge of Canadian history and his generous guidance. It was always a mystery how he could have so many graduate students, so many theses to read, in addition to doing his own teaching and all of his research. And yet he always returned our work with insightful comments in a timely manner. He was also incredibly patient. By the time I graduated with my PhD, I had been teaching part-time at Glendon, then full-time at U of T Mississauga, and had given birth to my first child. But never once did he suggest that I was taking too long to complete my dissertation. Ramsay's writings about limited identities directly influenced a number of us younger historians to explore more deeply issues relating to region, race, ethnicity, class, and gender. In 1974, he penned an introduction to the reprint of Catherine Cleverdon's The Woman's Suffrage Movement in Canada. His synopsis of the intellectual underpinnings of the movement, its class dynamics, and its regional variations remains useful and perceptive some 40 years later. The book of documents that he and Wendy Mitchinson published 2 years later, entitled The Proper Sphere, Women's Place in Canadian Society, was a significant pedagogical tool for those of us who were just starting to offer the first university courses in Canadian women's history. It was also an important affirmation for young feminist historians to have a senior distinguished male scholar contributing to this nascent field. Ramsay's subsequent forays into other areas of history, such as Aboriginal and environmental history, were an ongoing reminder not only of his intellectual curiosity, but also of the unique perspective that historians can bring to contemporary issues. To conclude, it is impossible for me to imagine what the trajectory of my academic career might have been without Ramsay Cook. He was an exemplary scholar, a kind and generous mentor, a gentleman, a true mensch. Thankfully, he has left behind a remarkable body of work that will continue to inspire future generations of Canadian historians and many wonderful memories for those of us whose lives he enriched. Thank you very much.